I read where I was talking about the process of narrating a book. I read the whole book in its entirety so I can get an idea of the story, where the author is coming from, what kind of tension or tenor or tone that I need to bring to dialogue. This was a very interesting book because there is a lot of informative, therapeutic text at the beginning of every chapter. It's led by a quote. Then there is a lot of relational therapy type of text. And then you go into Judy's story. And Judy always has kind of placed the story at about where she is in talking about relationships. So it flows really well. What I was unprepared for was I thought I was getting into a book about relationships, a how-to, a self-help, a self-improvement kind of thing, where it was going to be mostly informative. And so I have a way of kind of making my voice informative, and, I go into information. What I wasn't prepared for was the impact that Judy's story was going to have on me, because I had no idea where she was coming from. So I read the entire story through, and before I had even finished it, I need to correct that and be more accurate. Before I had finished it, I shot off an email to Judy's team member on her publishing team, and I said, oh my gosh, you had no way of knowing this, but I actually relate to this story on multiple levels that there's no way to even know how I could be brought into this circle, how I could even be brought into this project with the kind of background that I have. And so the team member held that email until Judy had made a final selection as to who was going to take the job. And then she sent it on to Judy after I was hired, because she didn't want my backstory to color Judy's Judy's desires for what she wanted to come through in the voice. And then I knew that I had a challenge to bring the intensity to Judy's story that it deserved. And so as I was going through it, as I started to read chapter after chapter, I kind of got into that perfectionist paralysis, where the burden of telling somebody's true story and the true emotions that they were going through at the time was a collective burden. I mean, it was like a weight, a responsibility, because I wanted to really do right by the story, even though I had never met Judy, had never talked to her. This was my, my burden that I brought to this project. And I'm telling you that I went through, I think it was the third chapter, and without giving away spoilers.
Yeah, there's lots of spoiler alerts.
Yeah, you gotta read the book. Or you gotta listen to the book even. There were portions of Judy's story where she was extremely vulnerable, and she poured herself into this story, and I literally poured myself into it as well, because I was sobbing the whole time that I was reading it, and I'd have to stop, clear my throat, because ugly crying is not allowed in professional narration. Nobody wants to hear an ugly, snorting, sniffling, crying. But that was how much it impacted me. And I couldn't wait to tell Judy that how much her story was impacting me, and how much it was changing my performance as a narrator, because I would get through one part. There were two parts of the book, Judy. I didn't even tell you about the second one, but the second one was towards the end. Two portions of the book that I really poured myself out emotionally in. And I did have to go back and clean it up. There was a lot of editing that had to be done around that time, but I do hope still that you'll hear my voice a little bit. You'll hear some of the emotion in my voice, but hopefully it's apropos and not disproportionate. That is what my hope is. as a professional.
Well, that just touches me because people want authenticity. They don't, you know, and that was one thing as I was listening to some of the auditions, and I'm probably just sort of concise, but there were people that were really good, excellent. But when I listened to you, Heidi, even though you hadn't heard the entire book, or you know, didn't know what you were getting into when you auditioned, but when I heard your voice, there was something that I thought she gets it. There was this soul connection, which I think was really amazing, even at that stage. And so then when I got Jen's email that she forwarded on, I was even so much more touched, because it is divine invitations to your authentic self. This was truly a divine invitation. I just brought you and I together.
So
very different parts of the United States, right?
Yes, I know, and I read that in the book. Actually, it was in, I think it was part of. We have certain checkpoints along the way, production, and I think I sent off the first 15 minutes. This is truly a divine invitation, which is actually terminology that I'm not unfamiliar with. I've heard it, you know, I've heard it, people say it's a God thing, or I've heard people say like a divine intervention, or, you know, something that shows that there's something bigger at play, something to indicate that. But it was the first time I heard it called an invitation, and that was in Judy's book. And I thought that's exactly what this was, because I couldn't explain how much, I don't even know if I'm still adequate enough to explain the connection that I had with Judy just through her written words. And I thought, what is it going to be like when I actually get to talk to her? So what she didn't know at the time was that she chose a narrator that shared many similar backgrounds, very much a similar faith perspective. But the background that was most significant in terms of the context of the book, or the subject of the subject matter of the book, pardon me, is beyond messy relationships. And I had shared many similar experiences, maybe not even to some of the intensity that Judy did herself, but I had been married for almost 23 years, and I had been partnered with someone who had significant neurological and psychological dysfunctions that made relationships extremely brutal. And it was just going through Judy's book, I wasn't expecting to connect on a spiritual level, and I most certainly did. I already knew from having read the book itself that I was going to connect on a psychological level. The spiritual level was a gift from God, and it really turned out. And then I finally got to connect with Judy on the phone, and we connected on, I think, was it FaceTime, Judy, or was it?
Yeah, I think it was. We were on our FaceTime.
Yes, because I was on the road
or so. There was an instant connection.
And I was literally
known you all my life.
And we ended up, I sat in that parking lot happily, very excited to be talking to Judy, the author of the book that I had completed narration on it a couple of weeks earlier, before I ever even got a chance to talk to Judy. And it was just magical. And by magical, you know what I mean, metaphorically speaking, because at this point we're acknowledging it is a God thing. It was a divine invitation, and I'm so grateful for it, because now Judy's in my life.
I'm so touched. I really am. It's amazing that you're here, we've met, because really, this is a very intimate journey. It's a very solitude journey in a way, in writing, but at the same time, I did have people that were giving me feedback as I wrote the book. I had beta readers, 3 or so at the time, and they gave me some feedback, but really not knowing how, you know, your own story is not your own story, you're just used to it. But then to write it out and to connect the dots, it was remarkable therapy for me as a therapist. But just to let people know too, and Heidi, you need to probably talk because of the distortion of my voice. But I do show up as a therapist at the beginning of each of the chapters. So it's not just reading someone's memoir or story. First of all, I think we both know, and many other people know, that this is a bigger story than just my story. And especially during such a time as what we're living in right now. But yeah, I think I lost my train of thought. But I think the point being is that you don't know what impact it could make, and then connecting with you and Heidi, just knowing this book is going to go another level higher as far as the dramatization of it, right? And it'll be a different experience when people start to listen to the story. Yeah.
I think it will be. I've not seen this done, or at least I haven't participated in a project I thought that was like this, where it was therapeutic at the beginning, but also that section was backed up by your own experiences, and you were really, it was very personal, it was very intimate. One of the things that Judy talks about in her book is what helped in her healing process, and some of the things where she found freedom from some of this pain or even some of the burden that she was carrying. And I identified even on that level, Judy. Remember, we were talking about when you said you started dancing and the freedom that you found and the joy that blossomed within you was part of the healing. It was something that was very personal to me, because I too found an activity after the pain, after the struggle, that was entirely my own, that brings me all over the country under extremely, diverse circumstances with people from all walks of life. I'm incredibly passionate about it. It is where I have found my freedom. It's actually where Judy found me, in the parking lot that one day.
Tell them what it is. Everybody's got a question mark on what is this accent?
I am a passionate motorcyclist. I learned how to ride motorcycles after a very, very devastating, destructive divorce process. It was nuclear in its destruction. And I came out of that. I believe wholeheartedly that God protected a spark in my spirit, that he protected an element of joy and an element of passion in my life that I really thought had maybe just been snuffed out through the circumstances that I was enduring. And this passion came as a complete and total surprise, but it was something that I claimed for myself. It was something that was really not a part of my former married life as a wife and a mother. It was something that I was completely free of previous labels and previous experiences, and it led me to explore, and it gave me so much courage. And every year that went by, I kind of had a word that was my talisman through the year. At one point, the word was joy. Another point, it was courage. Another point, it was freedom. All of these things kind of marked the milestones that I was finding within myself all along this journey as I got past the messiness of my marriage and moved into life as a single person and beyond. That's what her book is about, is moving beyond the pain, the shame, the mess, the guilt, what could I have done differently? What could I have done more? To get past that and come back to the core of who you are. And joy is one of the fruits of the Spirit. God wants us to have this. Very different from happiness, right, Judy?
Absolutely.
Happiness is temporary. It's based on your circumstances, but joy comes from your heart. That's born in your spirit. And I believe, I'm going to make myself cry. I believe that God protected that. And I have found it on the back of a motorcycle, of all things. And I go out into nature, and nature is where I talk to God. That is where I have my longest, most intimate conversations with my Creator, with the divine. And I have found that my motorcycle is what carries me there. So I always talk about my motorcycle. Well, that's kind of my church.